Hello, and you are back in the Velvet Room with Jokerthefool. This is our 19th episode, and today we'll be discussing how Newsom isn't California's only problem and the concept of scarcity. So we're going to get right into it with California, as we unaffectionately call it, has a lot of problems, and one of the most recent ones is happening in Los Angeles. So there was this New York Post article, it will be linked in the description of the podcast, and the headline is Inside LA's Brazen Sex Market, where women sell themselves in broad daylight, emboldened by California's new law. So I'm going to um, what's the word? Give you a paraphrase. Exactly, paraphrase this article. So essentially, California passes the Safer Streets Act, which makes loitering completely legal, and you have all this nighttime sex work that used to be going on exclusively at night is going on in broad daylight. So you see, 2 p.m. you can drive by and see 10 girls on the corner, condoms on the ground, women wearing, G-strings, high heels in broad daylight. So basically just a red light district, an open air brothel being run in broad daylight. This is something that, families have to see. This is something that anyone's going to be seeing, just going about their normal business. If you're going down this, seems like 40 block area in Los Angeles. And now a lot of people will say, hey, Newsom passing this law making loitering legal is the problem. The issue is that these women are selling themselves in the first place, and they feel the need, or they're being coerced to do this. As the article goes on, a lot of sex workers are not doing it voluntarily, and there are nonprofits. I'm going through the article. Journey Out tries to connect with women who are being sex trafficked, but that's not happening as much because the cops aren't pulling these women over and detaining them, and then finding out if they are actually being sex trafficked. That's not happening. So that pipeline to find women who are being victimized in that sort of way is not happening at all. And this speaks to the deep cultural problems that are plaguing not only this entire country, but California, especially the urban centers of California, SoCal, as you would call it, are plagued with issues like fatherlessness, rampant drug use, generational poverty, and that's what pushes these women to use to become sex workers, and they want to do it as much as possible. And if the state says, hey, you can loiter and do this any time of day, and the police aren't going to aggress upon you, they're just going to do that, and they're going to engage in this degenerate behavior. And some of them aren't doing it voluntarily because they've got their ass owned by a pimp or two, or the cartels or whatever. They're being trafficked, and they're basically being sold on the streets for men who can't control themselves. And that is also part of the problem, is that we have a very masculine society, but those urges are still there. So people use the sex worker industry, or the sex work, or sex workers as an outlet for that, instead of practicing the self-control necessary to realize, hey, this industry exists, these women do these sorts of things, but it's not morally correct at all to engage in that sort of behavior just because it would feel good in the moment. And I'm not saying that I'm above acting on my primal urges at all. Not that I've lost my virginity or engaged in these things, but I've talked about being a porn addict ad nauseum, so I'm not going to talk your ear off more about that. But the whole thing is that you have to come to the fundamental realization that engaging with sex workers in this way, as in engaging in the exchange of sex acts, or buying porn, or doing the OnlyFans stuff, or whatever it is not only bad for the women who do this, is bad for the consumers as well. Even if you're feeling good in the moment, they feel like they're getting their rocks off, and that's worthwhile. It's not in the long term. It's very degrading to the purchaser and the producer in that. And then there's also the whole thing with, like I've said before, this article goes over the whole fact that a lot of women who get involved in prostitution, in sex work, in these sorts of things, are the victims of trafficking. This is involuntary. Pornhub has child porn on it that's been very well established. Child porn, rape videos. I'm uploading this to YouTube, going to get banned. But this needs to be said, is that fundamentally this industry, the sex work industry, whether that's porn, whether that's full service sex work, has a lot of very seedy, immoral people, and they are willing to basically use women as sex slaves, and they'll do that by selling women directly to men, or raping them, filming those rapes, and then putting them online for money. They are not above doing that, and that mindset of not being above doing those sorts of things is enabled by the legal porn industry in a way, because it just degrades the sexual boundaries that we set with each other as a culture, and that's definitely very problematic. I'm against it, and the fact that all that exists and that's very prevalent in the culture is the reason why you have these open air brothels in Los Angeles. The fact that Newsom passed a law and made loitering legal and enabled these women to be more brazen with offering their services, doing it during the daylight, is a symptom of the problem, and it's not being caused by what Newsom's doing. Now, of course, California could legalize prostitution and say it can only be done in brothels and have it be heavily regulated, and have a pipeline that the state has to make sure that people who are being trafficked are getting into that. But that requires planning, that requires having meaningful political capital, that requires doing stuff that might not feel instantaneously good in the moment, and you might get some pushback from people who are more conservative in California, so you couldn't get those, fence sitter votes as well. So that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is just like, we'll just pass a Safer Streets Act and make loitering legal, and then they can do this, and we can turn a blind eye to it, and the city becomes even more infested with garbage criminal activity. And that's what you're seeing happening here, because you have these fundamental cultural problems: the drug use, the poverty, the fatherlessness, the abusive households, if both parents are present in the households and they're not doing well as people, and they are abusing each other, or one's abusing another, and that's reflective on how the child develops, and then they go into doing stuff like drug use or becoming sex workers, or whatever it is. And you have these generational cultural issues that we're dealing with, and they're showing themselves more and more as, Newsom and all these blue Democrat politicians are enacting more and more awful legislation onto their geographical areas, which they control, which just exposes how bad these cultural issues are. So the cultural issues are the problem. The lack of strong families and strong communities are the problem. Not necessarily the fact that Newsom is doing all these shenanigans, not the fact that these Democrats are doing all these shenanigans are bad. They're making things worse, but these things wouldn't be an issue if we had a strong culture, if we had strong families, if that fundamental trinity of humanity, the man, the woman, and their children, was alive and well in this country, and something that actually meaningfully existed for the average American. If that was present, if that was there for these women, then they wouldn't be they wouldn't be in G-strings selling themselves for $40 to a couple $100 for anybody who was driving on the corner in broad daylight. That wouldn't be a thing 9 times out of 10. But most likely they don't have a stable family life, so they feel turned to do these sorts of things, or unfortunately they get sex trafficked into doing those things. And now, since I did bring up a monetary number, we're going to go into the fundamental principle of economics, and that is scarcity. So a funny thing, I did see a tweet about this, and that's how I found out about this article. Very making fun of, the fact that some of these women would sell themselves for $40, saying if you pull up onto one of these streets and you see one girl, she can charge whatever she wants, right? If you're in the market to buy that, she can charge whatever she wants. But if she's competing with 10 other girls, then what she's providing you isn't expensive. You go to one and say, I'm going to give it out for $400. You say that's ridiculous, and you go to the next girl. It's like, well, I'll only do it for 200. Boom. And then if you got 10 girls, you have a supply of possible prostitutes. So the value of a prostitute willing to engage in full service sex work with you is drastically lower than if there's only one or two. This is another thing that I believe a lesbian in New York City was complaining about, how most prostitutes are straight women, so they'll only have sex with men, so they won't have sex with women, and the ones who are willing to have sex with women charge more because they know they are providing a service that not every prostitute is willing to provide. So scarcity is the fundamental principle of economics. That is something you are going to have to be aware of if you want to have any understanding of economics, is that it is scarcity. That is why the study of economics exists, is the fact that you can't have everything, and the fact that you cannot have everything means that there has to be a system that comes into place to distribute the limited amount of things that we do have. And this is why stuff like universal health care or it's just free money, these things don't work, because if you have something like, health care, where there's only X amount of doctors and Y amount of people who need to see doctors, and Y is more than X, then doctors need to be part of a system or create a system, or like I said, it's in this case be part of a system that distributes their labor and efforts to that Y population in a way that's hopefully fair and economical for the average person. But that means there are going to be people who get left out. There are people who are going to be unable to get healthcare, and some of that is by their own actions. Some people don't do anything to take care of their health, and as such, the amount of health care that they need can't possibly be met within their means. If you're an alcoholic, you're drinking all the time, and you put yourself into a case where you have cirrhosis, you need a liver transplant, and you're in an economically poor situation where you can't afford a full-on organ transplant, there are personal decisions that you made to get into that situation. Now, of course, not everyone, some people are, no fault of their own in a lower economic class, and they get something like cancer, and you have all these medical bills and medical debt that you accrue from getting cancer treatments when you didn't personally do anything to give yourself cancer, which is why I do think we need a better system in general for healthcare. And that means getting the state out of the healthcare market and letting doctors sell their services freely without having the bureaucracy of these big insurance companies that collude with the state. It's that system that's very toxic, which makes it so you have the fact that the hospital administrators have to work with the insurance companies. They have to overcharge everything because the insurance company will say, a service that costs $60 will only pay $40 for it, and the hospital wants $60, so they have to say, we have to charge $100 and negotiate down to $60, and you don't have insurance, then they're just going to charge you that full $100 because they want to be quote-unquote fair to everybody. So getting the state out of the healthcare system in this country, at least, I would say everywhere, but in this country at least, where doctors, hospitals, individual medical practices could freely exchange their services with the individual and not have to work with these state-regulated, a lot of times state-owned insurance companies, would be a lot better for the individual, in my opinion. But I've been talking your ear off for about 14 minutes now, so I'm going to cut this off. We're going to go into the intro, and remember, scarcity is the fundamental principle of economics. Economics only exists because resources are finite, people want them, and there isn't enough to go around, essentially. So the distribution of finite resources is why economics exists. It's why the study of markets exists, and also the culture is important, and the state isn't. And the state collapsing and doing things like what's happening in California is a a symptom of our broken culture and not the cause of these sorts of things. So when you see these headlines where, you see this degeneracy, you see all this garbage going on in these blue cities, it's indicative of the broken culture, and now a lot of it's been enabled by the state, but again, the culture is the issue. But with that, I am actually going to go into the outro now, so I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you next time. Thank you for being in the Velvet Room with Joker the Fool. Be sure to follow my Substack, velvetroompublishing.substack.com, to read Machine to Man and all my other projects.